Good morning. Today is the 2nd of Av and the 20th of July. We're up to the fifth reading of Parashat Devarim, and the fifth reading recounts what happened after the sin of the spies. And there's actually a map. I hope there's a map here in the version I'm using. I'd like to show you exactly what was going on physically, but I may not find this map. Should have prepared it. I don't see it. In any case, I know where I have another map. Here we go. Here it is. Okay. So what we have here is pretty much the Sinai Peninsula. And what you can see, according to this map, is that the land of where they're going to come into is about here. This is the land of Canaan. And then we have, from north to south, we have Ammon, Moab, and Edom. If this is exactly the right proportions, it doesn't really matter. That's the order, though. And they spend most of the 38 years around here, in this location. Pretty much one location. They didn't move around that much. They were 19 years in Kadesh, and then they moved around for another 19 years into different places. What's the point, though? What happened there? During those 38 years, we said that the men who were over 20 years old, between the ages of 20 and 60, passed on during those 38 years. Meaning that it was a sort of a judgment. And this is later described in Ezekiel 20. I don't want to get into the verses there. You can look it up if you want. We said there's a lot of retelling of the history of the Jewish people in Ezekiel. And there we see that this is called a judgment. It's a judgment upon the Jewish people, cleansing out those who did not merit to come into the land of Israel. And this is a process that always goes on. It's not an evolutionary process. It's not something that is natural. On the contrary, it's unnatural. It's supernatural. And the idea is that there is a certain state of mind or mindset that is not appropriate and cannot enter into the land of Israel. And that's very harsh. It sounds to us very harsh. In the Torah, it's done with people dying. Today, it's done mostly through what we would call the war today is an intellectual war. It's a war about what is the correct mindset, how should we live our lives, and so on. That's very important to know that this is going on all the time. And mindsets are being, as it were, replaced by higher versions. Sometimes the higher versions are better, sometimes they're not as good, but this is all going on. In Ezekiel, he calls this the desert of the nations, Midbar Ha'amim. And he says that know that before I take you back into the land of Israel again, he's saying that to those who are coming into exile after the destruction of the first temple, you will have to pass through the desert of the nations again. Meaning, in the same way that you had to pass when you came into the land of Israel the first time and you spent 40 years there, altogether 38 years, and you were sifted through, some of you made it, some of you didn't make it. The same thing is going to happen when the final redemption occurs. The same exact process. Except, like we said, that the process now is not meant to be necessarily one of people dying from it, but rather that the mindsets that are not appropriate, they disappear. Now, we have to understand what was the main mindset that was done with in the story that it tells us now in the fifth reading. And so this is the mindset of the spies. We said there were the spies who said that the nations that live in the land of Israel, they're too powerful. And God even cannot get them out. They said this verse that reads, Ki chazak hu mimenu. They are more powerful than him. Now this mimenu, it can be understood as either us or him. If they're saying us, they mean they're more powerful than we Jews. If they're saying him with a capital H, what they mean is that they're more powerful than God. Now, how can that even be? How could somebody say something like that? Now, this is a very important thing because here we're touching on what is maybe the essence of all of Jewish theology. And that is that there is nature. There's no one who denies that and says there's no nature, there's no natural laws, there are no limits. Of course there are. You can't defy gravity, and you have to be careful when you cut something not to cut yourself, and so on. Nature exists. Now the question is, who controls nature? The spies were of the attitude that once God had created nature, he would not break his own mold. In other words, he would not deny nature. He would not contradict nature. And so, if naturally I look at these nations that are sitting in the land of Canaan, the land of Israel, and I look at myself and I say they're much more powerful than I am, God will not perform miracles. Not only will he not, he could, but he can't. He cannot disobey the laws of nature that he placed himself within. Now, normally we accept this. Normally we say this is exactly how the world works. Once God set up nature, nature is supposed to function. He's not supposed to destroy it. He's not supposed to override it. If he did override it, then we'd have a big problem. What would our problem be? Our problem would be that there wouldn't be any free will in the world, because it would be evident that there's only God. There's only freedom of choice of God. There's no other option. And the option to choose between following God and following nature wouldn't exist, because even nature would be just a reflection of God. And again, that would come because we would see that nature could change at someone's whim. So that is not the normal way that things happen. Yet, in spite of that, the whole reading that we see today is that there were three nations that lived in these places with Ammon, Moab, and Edom, nations that preceded them, and then they conquered them. And if the thinking is that the world is supposed to be constant, then it would be impossible for one nation to conquer another. It should have been that if this is the borders that God gave when he constructed the earth, and this area was dedicated to this nation, and this area was dedicated to that nation. There's even a verse, Yatsev Gvulot Amim. He constituted, he made concrete the borders of nations, and they're not supposed to change. And yet we see that these things do change. When you read today's portion, you'll see that it's all about how nation superseded nation in this area. What was the lesson? The lesson was they were supposed to understand from this that in the end, God does change nature. But it's not done in order to circumvent nature. It's done only in order to change our mindset. It's not done in order to make things easier or harder or possible or impossible. That's not why it's done. It's only done for one thing, to change my mindset. I may have to continue to live in a world where nature is set and it doesn't change. But my mindset has to be that even though God set it up this way, he is still free to act however he wants. How was this stated in the Middle Ages? This was the famous question that Maimonides repeats in his book, even a couple of times. Can God make a stone that he cannot pick up? And the answer is, of course he can make a stone that he can't pick up. That's one of his choices. And so the concrete barriers between nature, the concrete borders, the nations of Canaan that are in the land of Israel, they're like a stone that he can't pick up. That's true. There is such a thing. That is the essence of what it means that there's laws of nature. However, even as much as he created the world this way, he can still pick it up later. That is the paradox that this mindset has to acquire, that the mindset of the people needs to acquire. The spies couldn't acquire it. What they understood in the end was the laws of nature are set, the laws of nations are set, these nations are here, we are there, there's no way we're coming in here. The mindset that they were supposed to understand from this entire exercise and these 38 years of circling in the same area with these three nations who superseded other nations was that even though it's true that nature is set, the laws of nations are set, the borders of nations are set, still God can override it. And again, it's not because I want him to override it to make my life easier. That's not the point. The point is to believe that this is possible. The point is to change my understanding, my intellect, to rise up from what the laws which are rational and understood, to rise up from that into my superconsciousness, which is my crown, where paradoxes are possible. And the whole point of the paradox, of course, is not to say that nature is variant, that it can change. The whole point is to say nature doesn't change, and yet paradoxically, God can still pick up that stone. He can still change nature, even though it doesn't change by itself. It's not meant to change. And so you have this strange reality of a paradox being the mindset that they were supposed to acquire before they came into the land of Israel. Why? Why was that? Because surprisingly enough, in the land of Israel, the point is to act by nature. The point is not to act supernaturally. It's very interesting. The land of Israel is meant to teach us to act as human beings, like regular people. It's actually outside the land of Israel that the paradoxes are more clear. In the land of Israel, they're not so clear. So when do you learn about paradox? You have to do it before you come in. Again, because the paradoxical mindset is not to take nature and churn it over and overturn its laws. The paradoxical nature is to understand what God is. Even if he never does that for you, even if that never actually happens. But the moment that you have that mindset, it unlocks a key in the mind, and it makes it possible for us as human beings to do things that seem impossible to us. You have to come to this understanding that the way you think you're limited, you're not really. The only way to come out of that, the only way to emerge from that, the only way to believe in that is to first of all believe that about God. Then when you understand that you have an image of God in you, then you begin to understand that about yourself. That those things that you think are impossible are not at all impossible. They're actually very possible. They're not going to happen because you're going to dominate nature, because you're going to churn it over, because you're going to magically make nature act the opposite from what it's supposed to act. It's going to happen because your own nature is going to supplant what you think you're capable of doing and what you think you're limited in. You yourself are going to change. And when you yourself change internally, then you see that the world was always waiting for you to come out with these abilities. And that is the purpose of these 38 years of running around right next to the land of Israel, not coming in yet, trying to overcome the mindset of the spies and coming into this mindset of paradox, first of all within ourselves. And we saw that, if you remember yesterday, with the first war that they had to fight, where last time they lost. This time they didn't even call upon God. We talked about this yesterday. They didn't even call about God. They did not even call upon God to help them. Rather, it's almost like the godliness came out of them. They didn't need to call him because it was already within them. They already understood that when the necessity happens, when you're faced with the necessity, then the paradox, the belief, the unlimited nature that is your true nature comes out, and you perform feats that you didn't think are at all possible. So that is the major message for us today from this fifth reading, that we circle around also now before coming into the final redemption. We're also circling around learning this new mindset that came from the Baal Shem Tov. And again, it was developed outside the land of Israel. And it's needed in order to come into the land of Israel. It's needed in order to come into the redemption, into the promised land, in the sense of what is human potential, where can it lead, how far can it take us, and so on.